Joining me now from Baltimore is Councilman Brandon Scott. Here in Cleveland, the Reverend Jawanza Colvin, and in Chicago, Cook County Commissioner Richard Boynton. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Councilman Scott, let me go to you first. 38 people killed in Baltimore this month. How does the city fight this?
You have to fight it in multiple ways, Reverend. We have to fight it from a community standpoint. We have to have, for me, we've been calling, I'm the co-founder of the 300 Men March movement. We've been calling for years for more men to get involved, especially in the lives of our young people in our communities. We have to fight with repairing the relationship between our police and our communities. We have to fight it from a lawmaking standpoint, but also we have to fight it from creating jobs and opportunity. But at the end of the day, one of the big things that we also do not talk about, we have to fight it from a self-responsibility and a community responsibility standpoint, that people in our communities have to want better for themselves, and we have to help them find the ways that they can better themselves.
Finding ways to better themselves. Reverend Colvin, you've done a lot of work to combat gun violence here in Cleveland. What do community leaders need to do? I know your work here. I know the 300 men that the councilman talks about in Baltimore. A lot of community groups not getting the attention. What works, and what do community leaders need to do?
Well, the first thing, Rev, I think that we need to begin to look at violence in a very broad sense. We talk about the violence that's taking place in our streets, but we also need to begin to understand violence, about the violence that people deal with systematically each and every day. So much of what we see in our community in terms of the crime and the depravity and some of the hostilities that we see are really born out of hopelessness and fear that people will not be able to rise out of their circumstances. We talk about violence, but we've got to talk about the violence of the defunding of public education. We've got to talk about the violence of the corporate robbing of people of their mortgages that left communities like Sandtown and neighboring communities here in Cleveland really deprived and stole millions of dollars of wealth out of our cities and our urban core, which were already needed. And in the midst of that, while we fight for individual institutional justice, when we think about individual justice for those families that are struggling with losses due to violence that they experience every day, the personal tragedies. And so for all of us, whether we're serving in city councils, whether we're serving in churches, we've got to begin to look at violence in a very total and comprehensive way, because when we do that, we realize that there are root causes to some of the individual acts that we see, and many of them are institutional.
Commissioner Boykin, gun violence, to stop it in Chicago. We've had a lot of issues there. I even moved in an apartment on the west side. We worked with our group there and around the country. You're pushing tougher penalties and more policing, but you've also called for jobs, training, and parenting workshops. Why are those things important?
Look, we've had 900 people shot since January. In Chicago, we've had over 162 people killed. Just last night, we had a 2-year-old shot. There are too many of our babies that are being shot. Individuals who ought to be focusing on education, but they can't focus on education because they're traumatized. They're being terrorized in their own community. We have to put an end to this violence. We're facing what I consider a state of emergency. This is the most pressing issue confronting elected officials right now in the city of Chicago and the county of Cook. We must deal with this violence, or this violence will deal with us. There's no greater issue than making sure that our young people can live the American dream of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and grow up in neighborhoods where they can walk down the streets feeling that they're safe. Grandmothers are being shot, just being on their porch. I mean, people are going down the streets, just shooting aimlessly out of cars. This kind of behavior is unacceptable. You know, we protest and we march whenever a white police officer shoots somebody African-American. We got to be just as outraged whenever somebody African-American kills another African-American. The reality of it is that we must put an end to this violence. This is unacceptable. It's unconscionable in a safe America. This is terrorism being perpetrated on communities of color.
Councilman Scott, on the commissioner's point, you know, the latest homicide victims in Baltimore are a mother and her 7-year-old son. Let me play part of that story.
The news was too much to take for the godfather of the 7-year-old boy who police say was shot in the head and killed in his Southwest Baltimore home. Police say the same thing happened to his mother. Family members tell us the victims are 31-year-old Jennifer Jeffrey Brown and her son, Kester Brown III.
Councilman, you're very familiar with this case. How is it affecting the community?
Well, young Kester is a student that I had the pleasure to meet. He goes to Baltimore International Academy, a school in my district where all the children are in language immersion. He just happened to be in a Chinese language immersion, and his entire school community is heartbroken. The entire community is heartbroken. We cannot have cowards and people that are the lowest excrement on earth going around killing our babies, and our whole community should be outraged, and they are. As I said yesterday, everybody that calls themselves a human, every man that calls themselves a man in our town should be hunting down information and hunting down this individual so that we can bring them to justice, because this is the kind of thing that we cannot accept. And this kind of violence is unacceptable. It's unacceptable when you kill anyone, but when you're taking out women and babies, then it's time for us to say enough is enough. And if people are still going to cower in their homes, particularly men in our community is going to cower in their homes and just go on Facebook and go on social media and comment and say, oh man, that's messed up, that's not enough. We have to get off our butts and do something, because we cannot stand by and let these cowards kill our babies in our community.
You know, Reverend Colvin, the commissioner said we must show the same outrage when we question policing as we do when there's gunshots and killings of blacks on blacks. You do that, I do that with my organization. In fact, just this week in Cleveland, the Justice Department agreed to reforms to the police department. You're having a big rally. I'm speaking for you tonight at your church. When you look at these reforms, how are these steps, and what do you think these steps could do to help drive down crime as well as holding police accountable?
Well, Rev, you're absolutely right. It is a step. We know that policing is the first doorstep into the entire criminal justice system. What's important to this consent decree, and I have not had the opportunity to read it in its entirety, but I have an overview of it, is it's aimed to bridge the relationship between the police and the community. We have seen in so many cities that those relationships between law enforcement and the community has been severed. And as a result of that, many neighbors and many members of the community don't feel comfortable with sharing with law enforcement and participating in the crime-solving endeavor. And as a result of that, there is this gap, there is this chasm, there is this distance between law enforcement and those whom they are oath to serve. And as a result of that, we see cases in which crimes are going unsolved because people have a fear of working with law enforcement because of their own experiences, because of what they've seen with respect to their family, anecdotal stories that we hear in our barbershops, our beauty shops. And so critical to any reform is not only going to be, as you pointed out, policies and procedures that limit the excessive use of force, but it's going to be making sure that the new policing that we see in our community bridges the gap, because we have got to change the culture within our force so we can change the culture in the relationship between law enforcement and the community. And when we address that, which is decades long, it did not begin with Cleveland, it did not begin in Ferguson, did not begin in Baltimore. This is a decades-long challenge between the relationship between law enforcement and the urban core, particularly the African-American community. And so critical is going to be community policing. It's going to be coming out of the squad cars. It's going to be sitting down with neighborhood residents, viewing them as members of a community and a civil society, and working together and rebuilding a trust that has been broken. And as a result of that, we now see increases in violence and increases in unsolved crimes as we're seeing this crime wave going throughout many of our urban neighborhoods and cities.
Commissioner Boykin, building the trust, as we showed that we will not tolerate in many of our endeavors police not being accountable, don't we also have to show we will not tolerate this kind of reckless violence and killing in our own community and stand up to those that behave and engage in that kind of activity? Don't we have to change that culture as well?
There is no question about it, Reverend. The reality of it is, though, is that too many of our citizens are being terrorized by a small group of individuals. They're small but determined to terrorize 95% of the community. And so people are unwilling to come forward when they see something. When they see a crime or a murder committed right in front of them, people are unwilling to come forward because they're scared. They're terrorized in their own community. And so part of my 7-point plan to curb violence is charging individuals who are pulling the trigger and co-conspirators with domestic terrorism. There is nothing different than an individual American citizen who joins Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and their stated goal is to kill Americans and destabilize America, or an individual who joins a gang. And that organization's goal is to control and coerce certain blocks in a neighborhood by any means necessary. We must not tolerate this. Let me tell you, America will not be destroyed by ISIS or by Al-Qaeda. America will be destroyed from within if it's to be destroyed. Rome was not destroyed by an existential threat. It was destroyed from within. And so this is a terrorist act that these individuals are doing. It's a small but determined group of individuals. We must get a hold of it. And we have to do it, and we have to do it now. We have to use everything we have. I've called for a joint summit of county and city leaders on June 13th. Let's come up with a plan that everybody can agree upon. I put together this 7-point plan. The community is bought into it. I think it's a great holistic plan that we can get it done if everybody has the collective will to do it.
And we must start, though, with building trust and accountability on all sides. This is a huge discussion. We will continue to have it here as we have in the past, and we must go forward and build that trust, and we must change the culture on all sides of this. Councilman Scott and Commissioner Boykin, Reverend Carvin, see you in about an hour. Thank you all for being on time and in this discussion tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend.